Please silence your cell phones if you have one, please. The Society Arts and History programs are made possible in part by funding from the Gloucester County Cultural and Heritage Commission at Rowan College of South Jersey, in partnership with the New Jersey State Council on the Arts Department of State and the National Endowment of the Arts and the New Jersey Historical Department of State, and by the contributions from our friends and members. The presentation today is Tavern Foods and Foodways in Delaware Valley by Dr. William Weaver. A couple reminders for you is we have last call for Taverns and Temperance over at the Old Town Hall. So if you haven't had a chance to go see that, and I think probably everybody here has probably done that already, but if you haven't, check it out, okay? And please let your people know. On that note, I think we'll say thank you for Dr. Weaver to be here, and I hand this over to you, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for coming out. We were here yesterday. The Roughwood Seed Collection and the Roughwood Center was involved in your asparagus festival. And as I said earlier, I think you should have, every time you have a drought, just get one of your festivals going. I think it rains every time you hold one. In any case, it was very nice to come back to Mullica Hill because I have been here, used to come here quite a bit years ago, and I'm a friend, so I would attend Mullica Hill Friends Meeting, and it's very personal experience coming back here and seeing you all, and how much Mullica Hill has changed since I first came. The job before me right now is to talk about tavern foods and foodways. I'm not going to concentrate specifically on the menus of particular taverns here because it's very hard to reconstruct. So I'm going to sort of step back and look at the whole Delaware Valley and what the different patterns of foodways were in the whole tavern story as it unfolded on both sides of the river. I have been able to discern, however, that there were customs different on this side of the river as there were in Pennsylvania. The laws were different. I have also just finished a history of Philadelphia foods. It's 19 essays, illustrated, and in that I really went in deep into the tavern history of the city. So what went on in Philadelphia is reflected in the taverns out here in the counties that surrounded it. So there's a lot of overlap. And in fact, people went back and forth across the river. Sometimes they were born over here and they opened a tavern in Philadelphia, or retired and came over here and opened a tavern on this side. So there's a lot of crossover. My first slide here has a picture of marinated shad. It took me 3 weeks to get a piece of shad in order to make that marinade this spring. I can remember when years ago I would come over here for shad suppers. Judy very kindly hosted several of them, and it was really a special event. This is becoming a thing of the past because the shad, even though it said they've bounced back, they've gotten scarce and expensive, and yet I know, starting with this image, that's something that was served in your local taverns, for sure. It was seasonal, but it was an inexpensive fish, and it was shared by everybody locally. So let's move on here. How do we document tavern life? This is a sort of point-for-point image that I put together, but there are inventories of taverns. I mean, what was listed in, when a person dies and he's a tavern owner, there has to be a legal list of what's inside, and so for the sale, so to speak. So we can find these inventories, and they tell us a great deal about how taverns were furnished. Local tax records are very important. They tell us who lived there and often what kinds of things were being grown on the property. Newspaper advertisements, agricultural tax returns. These are important. I don't know whether you know much about them, but every 10 years the government would do an agricultural census. And if you can locate your property and the owner, it will list how many fields of wheat, how many apple trees in the orchard, how many bushels of turnips are being produced, that kind of information. Because a lot of taverns were not independent of farmland. They were also part-time farmers growing things on the property, and this helps you reconstruct the menus that might have been served there. Census records help us figure out who lived there, and period paintings show us pictures of tavern interiors. I'm going to share some with you. And ephemera, trade cards, business cards, menus. This is another way of looking at the foods and foodways that are practiced inside the taverns. And archaeology, don't forget. If you have an historic tavern, first of all, you're going to start wanting to dig outside because people threw things away into their outhouse pits or whatever, And there's all sorts of information that you can retrieve from broken objects, broken wine bottles, broken glasses. It gives you a very good idea of what was actually being used on that site. Now, I am personally familiar with all of this because the house that I live in, which is going to become the Roughwood Center for Heritage Seedways, was built as a tavern. So it's on the National Register, has been there since 1985, and so we had to do our homework. And just because we went through census records, we found mulattoes, quote unquote, who were living and working in the tavern, and they were, as we learned, participants in a way station in the Underground Railroad. So this property has given birth to the AME Mount Zion Church in Devon, Pennsylvania. So we have inherited this whole family of color as part of our history. And this is the kind of thing that you can explore for each tavern in your county. And what story did it play? Who were the real people in the kitchen cooking? Because it's not always the person who's supposedly the owner. This is a picture of the house. It's a big tavern. It's a 28-room building, and it became a private home later on. But it was built in 1805, and it's on the National Register since 1985, and we've been a nonprofit since 2021, and the nonprofit will take over the ownership and maintenance of the property and the seed collection and all the other rigmarole that's connected with it. So in a sense, this building has got a future. A lot of taverns don't have good futures. As you well know, the wrecking ball is always out there for a gas station waiting to happen. In any case, having worked on this, I know what to look for in terms of tavern history. The original purpose of the building was food, of course. It operated as the Lamb Tavern. The governor of Pennsylvania gave us our liquor license. It was a political thing, in perpetuity. So I have a liquor license as well. It's probably worth more than the house. And as was a way station on the Underground Railroad. We happen to know what the tavern sign looked like, and we have a gingerbread that replicates Tilly. That was the fat-tailed sheep who posed for the tavern sign in 1812. Don't know what happened to Tilly. I hope she wasn't dinner at some point down the road. I'm just giving you a little background on our local tavern story. So the Roughwood Seed Collection is housed there, and that's one of the parts of our culinary history which I'll talk about that will help you with yours, because we have seeds from this side of the river in the collection, and so I'll get to that in a minute. The collection was founded by my grandfather. He was a Quaker in Westchester, Pennsylvania, H. Ralph Weaver, in 1932. We've got over 5,000 heirloom plants in that collection. And we have distributed seeds to over 100 different botanical gardens all over the world, and we're in contact with the Stockbridge Muncies in Wisconsin. We trade seeds with them, and the Delawares in Oklahoma. So there is a Native American connection there, and that's what I want to bring up. I want to start with them because those people were here too, and this was a very important Lenape collection of settlements. I think there were maybe 12 or 13 here at one point. And we know a lot about the way they lived, but the most important thing are the heirloom seeds. We have the largest collection of Native American seeds in the country. We got them from the Nanacoats and various other tribes. But this is the kind of food that was grown locally by people here in this county, and these are the sort of historic foods that have sort of slipped through the cracks of history, if you will. You're not going to find them mentioned in records. You might just see squash. Well, what kind of squash? Well, we can help fill in those blanks. As you see, the green striped maycocks are what those squash are called there in the basket. Also, the Muncie wampum beans are in the shells. Long story there. I'd like to come back and give a talk on the Lenape foods and foodways, because I have prepared a lecture for Haverford Friends meeting on that topic. I've mentioned it to James Turk, and it would be a very interesting exploration of the local foodways before the colonists arrived in this county. Next, however, we've got to keep moving here. Lenapehoking is the Native American name for this region that you are in, and if you'll notice, New Jersey is most of it. So this is a very important chunk of real estate in terms of Native American history. And if you look carefully at the map, this is where you are down here. This is the Raccoon Creek. You call it Raccoon Valley, is that what? Raccoon Creek Valley, anyway. These were very, we know that the Sicanese and these people and the big Sicanese are mentioned as being the best agriculturalists of the Lenape people. So the foods, the colonists got foods from these people, corn and squash. And lest we forget, there was a lingering effect here. Aside from the stones and the arrowheads that you now dig up, I went to a sale here in Mullica Hill years ago at a farm sale, and there was a funny basket in the barn, and I thought, there's something about this that I want to take home. Got it for $10, would you believe? No one knew what it was, but it's a real Lenape basket that was banging around here locally for a long time. I can't even find that farm anymore. I think it's all houses. But anyhow, this basket is a work basket, and it was originally yellow, black, and red. You can see how the colors have faded, but these are natural colors. Anyway, I just want to remind you that the wandering spirits of the Lenape are still here, and the foods that they have left us are still available to be grown in your kitchen gardens, because we've got the seed. And
Pardon me, how could you tell that it was an original basket? Because of the coloration?
Because of the way it's made and because of the age of the wood. There happens to be a Lenape basket in Trenton in the State Museum.
Okay.
And we have some Lenape baskets in Chester County Historical Society, and we compared them. It's made by the same hands. They're using wild plants to create those dyes that they used to color the baskets, which is why they faded so quickly in the sunlight. But anyway, the fact that it survived banging around in a barn is, there was a dead bat in it. That came with it. But anyhow, I want to move on here and get to the food story and the taverns, but I just wanted to start with the Indians because they're part of our history. And in my history of Philadelphia, which I've written, the first chapter is about what they left in Kinsessing. That was their settlement, which is now southwest Philly. Anyway, a lot of the Quakers who settled around here preserved Native American seeds for whatever reason, historically romantic, or simply because they were here already, so they knew that they could grow them. And so the Quaker Stokes and Janney families preserved the Remco cornhill or Rancocus cornhill bean that you see here. It's in our collection, and you can grow it again if you want. We have a website and we have a card, so you can contact us about that. There were corns also grown here. These are sweet corns, the Lenape mother corn and the blue that's used to make the Sindamokan. If we come back to do a lecture on the Sindamokan corn, on the Lenape, I'll be able to bring you some cornbread made with that, because it's parched blue sweet corn ground into flour and then made into bread. It is a totally different flavor than any cornbread you've ever had. But this is what the Delawares made. They used it, they carried it with them when they traveled. But these corns were grown here locally, and so were these other beans. We know that the Yarnell Quaker beans were grown over here. The Yarnell family is probably a name that's familiar to you all. And the Hannah Freeman was in Chester County. The Hannah Freeman Holbein is the other one there. But she was over here in New Jersey at the Brotherton Reserve during the French and Indian War. The Quakers rounded up the Native Americans so they wouldn't be murdered and put them in this safe place. And she was over here in New Jersey. We think that's where she learned to make baskets, because she really was a basket maker by trade when she came back to Pennsylvania. She was the last of the Yanami in our region, so all the others had left by the 1770s. Beans. We had the subject of beans. Now, if you take the beans out of the garden and you go into the tavern, what are you going to cook them in? The old bulge pots made out of redware were used to bake the beans with ham, whatever. But this is the tool. All of my personal collection that's old is now at Kutztown University in their Museum for Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage. But all the tools that have remained that we can use will stay at Roughwood, and we'll use them in our own food workshops, like the iron and things you can handle. But anyway, this is called a bulge pot, and they were later on in the 19th century. They made them out of cast iron for the stoves. But this is the old style hearth pot. Would be down on a trivet down in the hot ashes, okay? And that's how you do your beans in your tavern. To bring this around to Gloucester County, this is a Lenape squash that traces directly to your Raccoon Creek Valley. And how we learned that is a long, tangled story I won't go into here. But I can see that this is one of the squash that was probably grown in the gardens behind the taverns and farmhouses in this county. It's also a good storing squash, so you can eat it green when it's green and soft like zucchini, or you can let it develop a hard skin and store it over the winter. So you've got two different types of foods that you can make with it. Another area, and these are all, by the way, they come in white, dark green, and yellow. We even have had a couple of the dark green ones with orange fingers. And I've been trying to save seed from that because I think this is really weird, but the genes of this thing is so messed up. Not messed up, it's just, it's a swirling thing. With all the Native American plants, there's a lot of genetic variability, which is part of their healthiness because they can adapt very quickly to climate change. It's another important point we want to keep in mind here. But I mentioned earlier that ephemera is an important tool we use in understanding taverns. And I've tried to find old menus for some of your taverns, and I'm up against a brick wall, but I found others in South Jersey. And this is one for the Tuckahoe Inn, which is supposed to be an old one, but I understand it has burned down and there's a new building in its stead. What I learned is that if you can get a menu for an old tavern, beware of the history written on the back, because sometimes it's just not accurate, and that's the case on this particular menu. And if you'll notice, they have the Lenape Indians living in teepees, like the Great Plains Indians. Not an accurate piece of history, but anyway, it's fun to look at the menus because you see what locals are eating at some particular point in history. Thank you, James Turk, for this. He sent me this list of drinks, and it's actually a price list of what you can charge if you owned a tavern in this county. I find this a very fascinating list because there are all kinds of things on it that explain or at least hint at the way things were served in old taverns. For example, dinner in common. That was the most common way of eating food in a tavern. And in common meant there was just one big table. Everybody sat down family style and shared food. There's no printed menu. That's another reason why old tavern menus are almost they're totally rare, really, but they're almost non-existent because basically people who owned taverns simply cooked what they had for that day, and that's what the menu consisted of. So you come in, you sit down, and all right, they cooked ham, that's what you get. We cooked beans, that's what you get. Or they had they wrote in chalk on the wall what was available for the day, and you could take your pick. You'll notice that dinner in common is not that expensive as dinner, what do they call that up there? Extraordinary. Okay, that's an unusual term. Dinner extraordinary means you come into the tavern and you order a special meal for yourself at your own table. And that, of course, is much more expensive. You will find in travel accounts people who have sat either at the common table and complained about the rude people they sat with, or if they're upper class people, they have no complaints because probably they paid for an extraordinary meal off by themselves and they ate food that was cooked for them specially. And that's why there's a price difference. The nice thing about this is it lists the price of all the different kinds of drinks that were available. And over here, they have lime punch. I want to point out that limes were very cheap as opposed to lemons. Limes came up from the boats on their way back from Cuba to Philadelphia brought limes, key limes. They got them off the islands. There were wild limes that adapted there. Or sour oranges. That's another thing that's used extensively in Central American and Mexican cooking. Lemons came across the ocean from Italy and Spain. So just think, what comes a long distance? That's more expensive. So lemon is a luxury as opposed to the limes. And that's why you're going to see limes in the local taverns, because they were not altogether that expensive. But of course, they came in on ships to the port of Philadelphia and then came across the river. And that's part of the trade network that's sort of hidden in the backstory behind some of the foods listed on these tavern lists. Let's see, is there anything else? A cider royal, I don't know if you know what cider royal is, but it's hard cider with apple brandy mixed, all right, Applejack. So it's a double whammy. I understand that Applejack was one of the products that was produced around here on this side of the river. I know it's against the law to call it Jersey Lightning, but that's what people called it. I know this is a fact, that they can't, even today, call it Jersey Lightning because that sounds too enticing to teenagers. It's in your state laws. I know this because I talked to a distiller who has tried to get his Jersey Lightning named, but it won't happen. Let's see, what else do we have here? And also for the horse, you see, you're going to see something in a minute that shows you the tavern life wasn't just about the people who came there, but also the animals, because they got there on horseback or by cart, ox cart or whatever. So there's always a fodder aspect to your bill when you stay at a tavern, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Okay. This is the earliest oyster cellar and saloon menu that survives from Philadelphia. It's 1843, but I thought I would share it with you because it lists all the types of alcoholic beverages that were available in that period. The hot drinks, the cordials and wines, the temperance drinks. Of course, you had a temperance movement over here, and what that might entail. And don't forget at the very bottom, free lunch every day from 10 to 2. So I don't know whether free lunches were a thing of the tavern culture on this side of the river, but they were in Pennsylvania, because the more you spent on liquor, the freer the lunch. It was just one of the bait to get you in. Fancy drinks, and you'll notice up here, Morris River Coves, Tuckerton Bay plants. All the oysters being served here are from New Jersey, and oysters are one of the important foods served locally in your taverns, and I'm sure farmhouses also. They were something of a luxury in the old days, but there was so much oyster consumption taking place in the Delaware Valley that I've really had to spend a lot of time on that in my book about Philadelphia, and the number of schooners and that brought in oysters to the oyster wharves. Millions of oysters in a week. I mean, millions. They had to count every oyster that came off the boats. So they had to count them in 10s or 12s. This had to do with the freshness and the food safety rules in Philadelphia. But they could not leave the boat until they were counted. So they know exactly how many oysters came in. And all those documents still survive. And over here is what you would probably get if one of your local taverns had any kind of menu or receipt. This is typical of what you would get. Over here, the Doylestown Hotel, it doesn't really list much, just a dinner, or spirits, or wine, cigars, of course, and the date, and what they paid. And also, there's something in there about hay and oats. That was for the horse, okay? So that's basically the kind of document you're going to expect to find in these early taverns, or just more or less receipts. Mostly, in the old days, taverns were male dens, if you will. That's where the men went to hang out and drink. Women didn't basically go into taverns. So doesn't surprise me that they were selling cigars there. It tells me right away, oh yeah, there's spittoons. It's a real male joint. I can tell you right now, in Philadelphia, it was illegal for women to go into oyster cellars and taverns. I went through the city ordinances. Women would have been arrested for prostitution. Bingo. No questions asked. Also, the statutes say no male apprentices under the age of 18. So things are going on, and the laws are there for a reason. And so there's a whole underbelly story about what goes on in taverns, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later. Anyway, these are the kind of documentations that help us understand the sort of foods and drinks that were served in these establishments. Now, this is a woodcut that is found in a lot of Philadelphia almanacs and cookbooks. It's from the 1840s, and it's not a domestic kitchen. This is a tavern kitchen. There's an overabundance of food, but that's just part of its artistic license, if you will. For sure, sea turtles were not served at home. This is something that you prepared in a hotel or a tavern. It's a lot of work. But what you see here, if you just turn a blind eye to all this food, is that we've got a head cook. She's working at the stove. There is a sous chef, if you want to call her that, a black lady over here. She's doing the fast things. This woman at the stove is doing the slow stewing. This woman is doing, quick fries, an omelet, or something of that sort. And this man is the fish cook. He's opening wine bottles, but he's also preparing oysters and that sort of thing. That table in front of him was found in almost every tavern. It's a work table, but the lid comes up. It's lined with tin, and inside is seaweed and oysters or other shellfish. That's how they managed it. The shellfish did not sit around in baskets like that in the open. I mean, you want them to go off quickly? That's one way to do it. But anyway, there's a lot of artistic license going on in here. But at least it gives you a range of, an idea of the range of foods that would have been served in some of the taverns. The high-end ones, it's turtle soup for sure. The ones not so high-end, perhaps terrapin, because that was cheap and easy to get in those days. And as I said earlier, oysters were popular tavern food across the board. We have oyster shells in Devon. in the garden. They're everywhere because this was one of the common things that was very popular, even in the ice cream parlors and the restaurants that catered to women. Oysters were served there. It was just both sexes enjoyed oysters in those days. And that's a Philadelphia style oyster knife that you see. See that metal? In the, what did we hear? Oh, yes. Uh-oh. Somebody was talking on their cell phone, probably. All right. We've learned through research that the oyster knives that were used to pry open the oysters varied in style from like the Chesapeake Bay to Philadelphia, New York, New England. They were very regionalized in their style. So that's why I can call this a Philadelphia. This was made in Philadelphia, by the way. So they were, it's very interesting. We don't think about this sort of thing, that the very tools of the oyster trade were highly regional in style. Cookbooks are another place to go to find information about regional foodways. I chose these two because I couldn't find a cookbook from Gloucester County, but I know they must exist. However, this one's from Vineland, New Jersey, and the other one is from Camden. Now, the Camden one is Episcopalian, and so they're not dry. There are all kinds of alcoholic ingredients, wine used and not. And this one from Vineland is totally dry. And it's very interesting to see the different styles of cooking going on here. But this probably also reflects in a larger way what was happening here in your local food consumption patterns. Now, the common table. I just mentioned that earlier. This is a Krimmel painting of a common table. In other words, these folks are coming in and they're all sitting together and drinking together. And important details are included in this. Notice in the back, the tavern cage. All taverns had this bar that was literally called a cage because you could lock it up. You could pull down there's a grate you could pull down and lock the door because at night you didn't want the kids or other folks to break in and get at the liquor because the liquor's worth money and easily stolen and resold. So that's a tavern cage, and that's what a lot of them looked like. They're very simple. Some of them were quite elaborate, depending on the quality of the hotel or tavern involved. Again, you'll notice that the only woman in this picture is probably the tavern keeper's wife. And I say wife because there's a little girl beside her. Okay, so she's actually acting as the waitress. And that's okay because she is married and she's in the same room with her husband. She's not a lonely woman coming in from the outside, which was a no-no in those days. Other than that, everybody else is male, and they're drinking various, I have not been able to figure out, but it looks like some beer. This is some kind of wine. He's drinking it by a measure, and that's that little bottle is a specific measure. It may be half a pint or something like that. But you'll notice in that list that you saw earlier, the various beverages were priced according to their measure, and that was true on our side of the river too. Although we didn't have counties telling us what to charge for alcoholic beverages, it was sort of whatever the market could bear. One of the rules of thumb, however, is our tavern was the lamb. You could only have one lamb in each county. It was like a brand. So there was a lamb in Philadelphia, there was a lamb in Delaware County, and a lamb in Chester County. It turns out that the same people owned all three. But that's uncommon. It was sort of the lamb chain in those days, if you will. And the guy that owned them was the sheriff of Philadelphia, so he was investing, okay? But anyway, this is your common table. I love the idea this guy's bringing in cabbage. So, okay, somebody's going to make either sauerkraut or some kind of a cabbage dish for the common table. Now, is there anything I've missed there? If you see anything,
What does he have on his shoulder?
that's a good question, but I think,
Looks like a piece of deer or something?
no, it's something inside of a sack.
Oh, a sack, okay.
So I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's probably food, because this guy's bringing cabbage. He may be,
That's right.
yeah, there's something in there. All right. Here's another one of these Krimmel paintings. Again, there's your tavern cage. You'll notice in this case, I can read rum on the first barrel. The couple that are sitting at the table and the girl is turning away, that is your cider that's exploding. It's the frizzy cider, all right? It's fermenting. So that's a bit of humor that's here. What's going on? This is called a frolic. In other words, we have a black fiddler who's playing on the violin, and then we have some young people dancing to it. And this was quite common in the taverns of the period. But the frolics there was always things going on during frolics. In the background, you'll notice there's a couple making out over against the wall. There is a diary, 1807 diary of a Revolutionary War soldier who spent a lot of time here in New Jersey and over across the river in Pennsylvania. He ends up in Kentucky, but he gives the story of his life, which was basically a confession about how he lived a desolate life as a soldier, and he spent most of his money and time in taverns at frolics. Well, there were two kinds of frolics. These sort of benign ones where young people are dancing to a fiddler, and the other type of frolic where you made an arrangement with the tavern keeper to go upstairs with ladies. That was also called a frolic, and he describes in detail what went on, and he names the taverns. So it's a wonderful document. I mention it in my Philadelphia book because he times, names, and places, and we know that some of these were famous historic taverns, but we didn't know that they also did this other thing, if you will. What else? Oh, notice here on the wall, there are all sorts of handbills posted, lost horse, runaway servant, or whatever. This in the tavern is where you're going to expect to see this stuff stuck on the wall because this is public notice. That's what you'll see that word, public notice, in the laws of the period, and this is how you did it. You went around and just stuck it on the walls of the tavern. Now, this poor girl is sick. You notice she's just had her, that's a punch bowl she got sick into. So she was probably drinking too much. So there are some humorous things going on in these stories, in these paintings, and they're fun to take apart. But Krimmel is actually depicting accurate images of the period, and he's done a whole series of them. This is the last one I'll show you. Another frolic, again in the background. What's going on there? And it's a tavern for sure, because you can see outside there's the coaches and the horses and what's going on there. I'm jumping forward because there's a hiatus. In the old days, when people traveled from this point to that, the local taverns were important. You could only go around 15 miles in a day on a horse. So taverns were about every 15 miles on the local roads. With the coming of the automobile, this whole thing changes. And I think the clientele down here changed from farmers locally to folks on their way to the shore kind of things once we got the automobiles. There's a whole culture that evolved around what were called autoists. When the rich city folks got cars, they went out into the country to go rustic, and they came in droves, in like driving clubs. And that's what you see here. This happens to be a driving club out near Pittsburgh, going into this McConnellsburg hotel, which was very, very famous for its, This is during Prohibition, but there were little blue rooms in the back where you could get anything your heart desired if you knew the right person. Anyway, automobile tourism becomes an important aspect of taverns, rural on both sides of the river, because they become a new kind of destination. City folks going into the country for an experience, in a Sunday afternoon drive and a dinner in an old rustic, ye old inn type of idea. And on our side of the river, and I don't know how much transpired on this, but on our side of the river, chicken and waffles became the big thing in the country taverns. It could have been catfish and waffles over here or some local thing. I know as a fact in the 20s and 30s, to the south of you, people started to go to the local hotels for muskrat dinners. And I have gone to muskrat dinners, by the way, and it was very interesting being from Philadelphia and the only foreigner in the room, if you will. We came all the way down to Salem, to eat these muskrats, marsh rabbits, excuse me. But anyhow, these local foods became destination points for the automobile people, the autoists, as they were called in the old days. This is the chicken and waffle dinner spot in Valley Forge, not far from me. But anyway, I did a whole article for the Pennsylvania Historical Museums magazine on chicken and waffle dinners and how all that evolved. Around here, you had Prohibition, but not at the shore. The boats were 14 miles off, and at night they brought in the hooch, and this what is it called? The Acme Hotel. I have menus from this place too. Was famous as a bootlegger joint. So that's just another aspect of local history, and I know bootlegging took place around here as well. So this is what you expect. But I'm going to come down to a local tavern. This is thank you, Jim, for this. The Eagle Hotel in Mullica Hill. This is a little place by tavern standards, so it must have catered really local farmers and people of that kind. But anyhow, they held terrapin dinners in this local inn, and that's probably what made it famous locally, were these dinners where everybody got together. I don't know whether they were male and females going to this, because but if there were women accompanied by husbands, that's okay, because taverns were used to have dinners after a wedding, because there weren't no restaurants. This was the only place you could do it. Or after a funeral, you might have the funeral dinner at the tavern. There were these sort of public community events that took place in taverns, which were okay socially. That's where the sexes could mingle, so to speak, and didn't get into trouble. I love this picture. This is a very nice picture of an old tavern. Is it still standing? Oh, good for it. Does it? Yeah. Well, but at least you know what it looks like if you want to restore it. There you go. I noticed in my travels earlier, coming over here, going to dinners, shad dinners, whatever, the muskrat meals down in the south of the state. There was a common dish that appeared everywhere, and on our side of the river too, and it was pepper hash or pepper cabbage. It's just standard, and there's a big misconception that this is Pennsylvania Dutch. It's not, and I go into its history in my Philadelphia book. It's English, and you can find it in English cookbooks, only there wasn't a lot of sugar or the peppers. That's something we added on the American side of it. It was basically shredded cabbage and mustard. It was a sort of a spicy tart thing you ate with roasts. Well, it's a side dish yet today. getting back to taverns and what was served, this and the temperance theme, this is a trade card from Philadelphia, but the man, John Hines, who ran this coffee and oyster house was from New Jersey. We haven't been able to locate exactly where in New Jersey he came from, but it's somewhere in South Jersey. That much we've been able to ascertain. He's open all night. Why? Because he doesn't serve alcohol. He does not. He's a dry establishment. But more importantly, this is for farmers coming in from the Jersey side and from the backwoods of Pennsylvania to Philadelphia. They're rolling into the city at all hours of the night because they have to set up and start selling at 7 o'clock in the morning. So he's open all night, and the most important part of this trade card is what's on the back, the bill of fare, because this comes closest to what we could expect your local taverns to have on their own little menus. Very simple food, as you can see. But there's pepper pot, there's pork and beans, there's your bulge pot with your bean dish, omelets, corn and beef and cabbage, fried sausage. You see, it's very, very simple, very straightforward cooking. This is what you could expect in any of your country taverns as well. And oysters in season, always oysters in season. Pepper pot, my book is called Pepper Pot City. So that'll give you a hint that I'm going to be going into the story of Pepper Pot pretty deeply. But Pepper Pot was made over here. It may have been the tripe version. There were all kinds of pepper pots made in the 18th and 19th century. This one happens to be made with crab and mutton. So there you can see, there's the mutton there, crab. It's quite a spicy combination. There were local products that would have appeared on the table in the local taverns and at home. This is the Philadelphia white box radish, which was developed in Riverton, that's up that way. But they were being grown by the produce farmers all over South Jersey for shipment to Philadelphia, but also for local consumption, because this is one of the things you served on the relish trays that came out on the table for your common table, or your table d'hôte, as they called it in the old days. And we're growing, by the way, the Philadelphia white box right now. It's in the garden. We thinned it yesterday. So, the day before. Anyhow, one last thing. Tomatoes were a big product locally, so there were tomatoes on the table here. This is the Atlantic Prize tomato, which was developed in Atlantic County, but grown all over South Jersey. And I just thought it would be fun to share with you Cape May catsup, because it was made with these local tomatoes. So how Jersey can you get? And if you've got something that needs catsup, you can just, we could reconstruct a whole culinary profile for this region, but just based on the things that show up in the tavern lists and in the agricultural story. And I think you've got recipes for some of these over in the Historical Society building anyway. Parsnips were another one. The Quakers loved parsnips. And ham. This is a New Jersey recipe. Newbold's Burlington hams were very famous in this region, and also on the Jersey side. And not to forget, Jersey sweet potatoes. There's a dish called quarterly meeting pie, which the Quakers served at quarterly meeting, which was actually sweet potato pie, and it's like cheesecake. All right, you think you're eating cheesecake. I have quite a few recipes for that, but anyway. We have Jersey sweet potatoes in our collection. We've got the Jersey whites in white skin and pink skin, and the Jersey yellows. So we've got 4 types. And there are probably a lot more local variations. We would like to get all of them because they should be preserved and not ended up under one of those, big box things that I see along Route 322 coming over the river. Okay. Sweet potatoes are extremely important, and they're mentioned in a lot of the Quaker cookbooks published in Philadelphia. And also, specifically, if you can get a Jersey grower under contract, do it. So they're actually, referencing the fact that these are coming across the river from this part of the state. And they store well, which made them a very popular food for the for farmhouses and also in the city, because you could store them in your attic in a dry, not cold, but a dry place. There is a Quaker cookbook that actually goes in to the directions on how to store them in your attic. It's by Nicholson, Elizabeth Nicholson. She was a Orthodox friend, a conservative Quaker. I'll finish here only to say that I've got two more books in the works, and one of them is Grace Parr's Anglo-American Cookery. Grace Parr was a Philadelphia heiress. Her manuscript is in the Haddonfield Historical Society collection. I've edited it, published it, and there are a lot of revelations, culinary revelations in this book, which will make it interesting once it comes out to see how it's received. For example, she has an original recipe for Sally Lunn. You've probably heard of that, but this is what they looked like. They were baked in these crocks that were tall and narrow. Come on, here we go. This is what she looked like. She was painted by Benjamin West, a Quaker painter, and she has an overabundance of orange recipes in her book. Oranges were luxuries in those days, which will tell you right away. She had money. But in my Philadelphia book called Pepper Pot City, I go into the regional foods. There are a lot of melons and watermelons that came from this side of the river over to Pennsylvania. Early Hackensack is the one that you see in the picture. The Apis cakes are cookies, street cookies that were sold there, but also on this side of the river in the towns. They were also sold in Wilmington. This documentation is really interesting about how what happens in Philadelphia then gets copied in the county towns anyway, where they had street vendors selling similar foods. I'll finish I know you want to ask me questions, so I'm going to finish here. Thank you. The terrapins are endangered for sure, and I'm so glad we don't eat them anymore, because I think they're much more beautiful in the wild than in the pot. I go into a terrapin party in Philadelphia where everyone stops eating because they suddenly realize that this is getting creepy, because they're eating terrapin out of little bowls shaped like terrapins, and it starts playing head games with the dinner crowd. But anyhow, I'll stop here because you may have questions. Am I on time? Yes, there we go. No? Stunned silence?
No questions.
In the slide with the simple menu, toward the end, the pork and beans, there were numbers on the right, was that
Those were the
cents?
prices.
Was that cents?
Yes, yes. Dinner was 10 cents. Okay, times have changed.
Yeah.
I can almost date documents by the price of the food. It's very interesting how if you see enough of this, you begin to see what kind of patterns. And prices were up in 19 teens and 20s. 1929, boom, the price of food drops really radically, and then it comes up again during the war. So it's a very interesting pattern. That's the economic history of food. It's quite complicated, but it's part of the story. We have books here, if you want. Three of them are mine, and we have a salt rising bread cookbook. One of our board members, Jenny Bardwell, is an expert on Appalachian breads and foodways, and she's done this book on salt rising bread, and the Native Americans, the Lenape, have sent us their cookbook from Oklahoma, and we're selling that too. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. Any more questions? Yes.
That pork and beans metal container that they cook that in, or just terracotta?
The pot, originally they were doing it in pottery. When the cook stoves came in, the cast iron stoves, then the stoveworks made what was called hollowware. These were pots and pans to fit into the stove tops, and then they would do the pork and beans in that. Okay, so there's an evolution that goes on here. But some people continue to use the old earthenware pottery right into the end of the 19th century. It just depended on your economics. If you were wealthy, you got these fancy stoves with all the cook pots, and if you were really wealthy, they were copper. Okay, so there's a whole economic stratification that goes on with your kitchen story, for sure. Yes.
A lot of the farmers raised their own hogs and made their own hams. We killed hogs up till I was in my 20s. 4 hogs every year for the family.
Right.
Everything for the hog, made everything but the squeal.
That was very common all over southeastern Pennsylvania, and that scrapple was one of the side products of pork butchering in the fall.
We would sell some, and that went quick.
Yes. Well, my grandmother's father, William E. Hickman, was a scrapple producer in Chester County. He had a train line that came into his slaughterhouse. So the Hickman scrapple was pretty well known. I have the recipe. I did a book, by the way, on scrapple. You can find it online. It's called Country Scrapple, An American Tradition. And there are all sorts of scrapple recipes in that, not just with pigs and the oink that goes into the final recipe. Yes, and scrapple varied in its composition from county to county because there were all kinds of
We had
local
our own
tastes.
for the family.
Sure, absolutely. So pork was a very important product years ago, and that is sort of, I would say, the Anglo-American aspect of our regional foodways, and also the Pennsylvania Dutch. Pigs are very efficient in terms of they bulk out, and they don't take up 20 acres of grassland. You can feed them all sorts of things, and so were they? Do you know whether your family had Chester Whites? Because that was a popular breed
No,
in the 19s. Okay.
Poland, China, and
Okay, well, those come in later. Yeah, Chester Whites came from England, and they were brought over in the 1860s for breeding purposes. Yeah.
see Hampshires too.
Okay, right. Well, one of our board members, Todd Allman, is the meat man on the board. He has Dundor and Heaster Meats in Wyomissing, outside of Reading, and he farms and also contracts for heritage breeds. So all of his meats are heritage breeds of pigs, sheep, you name it. So, and you can he ships, by the way, directly. You can get meats from them. So we're trying to stay within that sphere, whether it's meat or vegetables or fruits. We're staying within the heritage, label, if you will, or the designation. But that's now a thing that's coming around. People are getting off of agricultural or agribusiness foods that are boxed in from who knows where to buy local and eat local, and that helps the local economy.
A lot of engineered stuff now.
Yeah. Well, we're not there. We're the opposite. So there's no GMOs at Roughwood. Genetically modified, and that's what I mean by GMO, or genetically engineered, because that's okay. Are we? No?
You're good, no?
All right. Well, thank you all for showing up. And, all right.
When will the new books be out?
Oh, well, the question is when my books be out. I have to turn in the Philadelphia book to my agent, so we're just at the beginning stages. The Grace Parr book is in limbo because we need $7,500 to finish the deal. and we haven't found that yet. So once that happens, Grace Parr will hit the ground running. It will be a collector's edition first, and then when that sells out, there'll be a trade edition. Okay, yeah. It's a beautiful book, by the way. And I did all the food photography. I did all the photography here. Well, not that, but most of it. So I used to work at Gourmet as an editor, so you learn the hard way. Baptism of fire. Doing covers for the magazine, can you imagine? All that shoe polish that made those Thanksgiving turkeys look brown. So, okay, well, thank you all. And, okay.
I'm going to read a couple more, but another applause for Dr. Weaver, please. And I just want to remind everybody about our Taverns and Temperance. Please tell everybody about it and go visit. The next program will be this June 2nd, and that's Jazz in June. And I believe that the jazz will be from Rowan, correct? Also, we have feedback forms, and if you could provide some feedback to us on our event, it would be nice. In addition to grant funding, donations are welcome to all, from all to us, and thank you again, Dr. Weaver, for coming out, and we'll close.